Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 9.0 Shadowlands Affliction Warlock DPS guide. In it, we're going to be covering talents, Mythic Plus, rating talents, Covenants, Soulbinds, Legendaries, Conduits, single target rotations, AoE rotations, Legendaries, if I ever said that, I don't know. Basically, everything that you should need to know to play an Affliction Warlock heading in Shadowlands. Any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here are indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions, grab them, feel free to do so. So with all that being said, let's talk about some of the changes that we've had from BFA heading into Shadowlands for Affliction Warlocks, and then get into the rest of the guide. So starting off with some new baseline spells that are part of our toolkit. Curse of Exhaustion, Tongues, and Weakness, I guess you can say, are back from classic WoW era of sorts. They have different durations. Basically, some are more applicable in certain settings than others. Exhaustion being good for slowing mobs in Mythic Plus, probably very strong in PvP. I don't know. I don't do it a whole lot, but the three curses are indeed back. You have Demonic Circle, which has now gone baseline, has been replaced by actual Howl of Terror now, which is great. Love to see that coming back. And for the most part, that's basically it for our baseline toolkit. Oh, we also have Fell Domination, which has indeed also made a return. This makes your next Voidwalker pet summon basically free, shard-wise, and the cast time is reduced by 5.5 seconds, effectively making it like a 0.5-ish second summon. Looking at Affliction's baseline toolkit, Malefic Rapture is your new Soul Shard spender. Unstable Affliction no longer costs a Soul Shard, however, it does still give you a Soul Shard if the target dies while UA is I guess, applied to it, in a sense. So, UA now has also a 21-second duration. Basically, this is your longer set it and forget it maintenance kind of dot. But UA does deal a pretty decent bit of damage, and actually moving around Unstable Affliction towards the end of mobs' lifespans, I guess, in Mythic Plus, just AoE-based settings is really important for shard gen, heading from one pack to the next, like in Mythic Plus and similar settings. Malefic Rapture, like I said, is your new Soul Shard spender. It deals a baseline amount of damage, which is increased by how many dots you have on the target for every Soul Shard you spend. So instead of having to wait for those 4 or 5 Unstable Afflictions to ramp up, spending 5 shards on those like in BFA, you get your dots rolling and then start spamming Rapture. You deal a lot more damage. It puts you in a much better spot, I guess, profile-wise in Mythic Plus, even in rating for the most part. And finally, we have Shadow's Embrace here. This has been replaced by Dark Caller, the talent. It is now a passive effect that increases, I guess, stacks to 3. It's stacked by Shadowbolt, Haunt, or Drain Soul, technically, because Drain Soul replaces Shadowbolt. It stacks to 9%, stacks 3 times up to 9%, and lasts for 12 seconds. This is a pretty substantial DPS increase, having this at 9% and maintaining this buff. It's a flat 9% damage increase to everything you do, not just your dots, your trinket procs, other damage-based effects. Whatever it is, Shadow's Embrace increases that. So looking at actual talents here, the changes that came as well. Deathbolt is now a PvP talent. We have Inevitable Demise in its place, the Azerite trait. Now, currently, this is a bit undertuned. We'll get to that in a minute, but it is indeed here. Basically the same as the Azerite, gains more value in AoE settings. Wrath and Agony has had its stack, I guess, max stat count increased to 18 from 15, and now also starts at 4 stacks. Sort of like a sudden onset meets a buffed Wrath and Agony kind of setting. Everything else is the same here. Same with this row here for the most part. The same thing here, honestly, all the way down to the 45 row. Dark Caller, once again, has replaced Shadow's Embrace. This gives you a 2-minute Dark Lair, which can sync well with your Dark Soul, is sort of the go-to choice depending on what you're doing in Mythic Plus, whether you're playing Dark Soul or not. Even though Dark Lair is not like an exceptionally strong cooldown, it's still a lot of value. Grimoire Sacrifice was buffed, damage-wise. Haunt's duration was increased, I believe, by 2 or 4 seconds. It has a 15-second cooldown and has an 18-second duration. So you have a bit of time to refresh the dot, I guess, once it comes off CD, without having Haunt drop. So it helps you get a higher uptime overall on Haunt. Grimoire Sacrifice's damage was increased, but let's be real here, it's still not very good. So, with that being said, those are the big changes to Affliction. Let's get into the actual talents for single target and then Mythic Plus. So when it comes to single target based talents, more so looking at a rating scenario for Affliction Warlocks, in the first row here, Drain Soul is, in my opinion, going to be your de facto choice. It stacks Shadow's Embrace much faster because you get 1 tick, or I guess 1 stack of Shadow's Embrace for each periodic tick that Drain Soul deals. And also, if there are adds dying in a fight, you get some shard sniping effects, or I guess added value. And hey, it does deal double damage if your mob is below 20% health. 25 row, you have Wrath and Agony, Absolute Corruption, or Siphon Life. The single target play here is going to be Siphon Life. It's another dot for more Rapture damage, and also just is more damage as a whole, being a 3rd dot. For the most part, it's very easy to maintain Siphon agony and corruption on one target, even two for the most part. So Siphon is really where you want to be as far as that goes. There might be a bit of like crossplay in Castle Nathria with there being like a council-based boss like Dance Boss, or a permanent 2-target boss, something along those lines, where Siphon Life still might see play just due to how strong it is with, you know, that third dot with Rapture and things of the sort. 30 row here, Demon Skin, Burning Rush, Dark Pact. For the most part, if you can make good use of Burning Rush, play Burning Rush. Dark Pact has been buffed substantially in Shadowlands, and I think it's underplayed in progression as a whole regardless. But if you can make good use out of Burning Rush, the extra mobility that it brings is just massive. So Burning Rush is going to be hands down, in my opinion, the de facto play in this row. 35 row, Sow the Seeds, Singularity, and Vile Taint. Spent Up Singularity is, so basically the difference here, Singularity is a 45-second cooldown, Vile Taint is 20, however it costs a Soul Shard. Singularity applies 1 dot to your main target, and if its AoE portion will pulse on the surrounding targets if there are any, but it doesn't apply a dot to them. Vile Taint, on the other hand, is like an AoE like place ground effect that will apply a dot to every single mob that it hits, but it costs a Soul Shard, and single target wise, barring this being buffed or way overtuned, you're going to want that shard to Rapture with your Agony, Corruption, Siphon, Singularity, and whatever Covenant you're playing. If it's a dot, it adds more value there. So the play in this row is Singularity, even though I can't change for 2 seconds here, single target wise for Affliction Warlocks. 40 row, Dark Fury, Coil, Howl of Terror. Mortal Coil is really strong. It is a 45-second cooldown that heals you for 20% of your maximum health. This is really, really strong. Previously, we had Demonic Circle in this row, so in place of Howl of Terror, so it made it a bit tough to like justify playing Coil over Circle, but now that it's not here anymore, Coil is insane. A 45-second cooldown, 20% heal is really, really strong. Yeah, I think personally, unless you're getting some weird use out of Dark Fury or Howl of Terror, Coil is where you want to be. 45 row, Haunt, Dark Caller, Grimoire of Sacrifice. For the most part, you have 2 talents here. You play Haunt. Dark Caller, while Dark Lair's cooldown being reduced to 2 minutes is strong, it's stronger in certain situations. Dark Lair itself is not a very strong cooldown. One of my biggest things over the course of Alpha and the Beta was trying to get Dark Lair buffed or changed, because in BFA's version of Affliction, you had Deathbolt as a talent in place of ID, and you also had stacking Unstable Afflictions. Unstable Affliction is limited to 1 now, and you're not getting that Deathbolt value anymore. So this being limited to 1 means you can't extend 5 UAs like previously you could with Dark Lair, and you're not getting that Deathbolt value either. I mean, it's not even there, but even if it was, you wouldn't get that value. That really hurt the overall just utility of Dark Lair in single target and Mythic Plus, basically everywhere, and we weren't really given a buff or anything to it to compensate. Now, Dark Lair does indeed extend all your dots, you know, by a certain amount, but in the end, like, Haunt giving you an extra 10% damage on your target while dealing a little bit of damage on its own is really strong. Similar to Shadow's Embrace, Haunt gives you a flat damage increase to trinkets, random damage procs, your dots, everything across the board. So single target, you're looking at playing Haunt. It's just the best play. 50 row here, Soul Conduit, Creeping Death, Dark Soul. Now, I will say this might end up coming down to Sims a bit. Soul Conduit has some added value in this row, because in BFA, Unstable Affliction single target, and in a handful of settings, was essentially limited to 5, because, I mean, you couldn't put more than 5 UAs on one target. So I'm meaning like Soul Conduit lost some value there. But now Malefic Rapture is really our only soul shard spender. So you can spam 7-8 Raptures in a row. Technically, if you get the right value or the right RNG and the right refunds, you can do it without having to worry about, okay, I've cast it 5 times, now I have to wait. So Soul Conduit definitely gains some value. There have been some initial sims showing Creeping Death being decent, but I feel personally the pick's going to be either Dark Soul or Soul Conduit. Now, Dark Soul, obviously, we've been pairing for the most part with our Dark Lair over the course of BFA. In the end, we're going to have to wait on sims to see where this is at here. I personally still feel like Dark Soul's probably going to end up being the play single target. But like I said, there could be some added value to Soul Conduit in certain settings, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it played later on in the expansion or the patch with more gearing coming around. But my money is still on Dark Soul Misery at this point for single target talents, playing an Affliction lock. Now, when it comes to Mythic Plus talents, things do change a bit from the single target counterpart here. We're still playing Drain Soul in the first row here, and I feel like gains even more value in Plus due to multiple targets like on Trash Packs, dying fast, extra shard sniping, more shard gen, and just having it be a channeled ability and getting periodic ticks on the target you're attacking is so much better than Shadow Bolt. For, I guess, technically you can make a case for like Shadow's Embrace stacking, but really just the cast time, the travel time on Shadow Bolt, it just feels miserable in Mythic Plus. Drain Soul here, I feel, is the de facto choice. 25 row, Absolute Corruption, rather than Agony. Now, for the most part here, you're probably going to be running Absolute Corruption. If you're playing a Sow the Seeds build, which is possible, you're going to want to be taking Writhe and Agony because you're casting Sow the Seeds in place of Rapture as your main like AoE spender. For the most part here, though, Siphon's is not worth trying to maintain on multiple targets. I'd say the de facto, like generic all-around build is going to end up running Drain Soul into Absolute Corruption, but we'll cover the Sow the Seeds build here in a minute. 30 row Burning Rush, I think just the de facto play. You can play it in plus, you can play Dark Pact or Skin if you want in plus. I think this is better. 35 row, Sow the Seeds, Singularity, Vile Taint. For the most part, I feel this build is also going to play Vile Taint. If you're in, like I said, a heavy AoE setting, we'll talk about it a bit now. You can play Sow the Seeds and like Writhe and Agony. I wouldn't fault you for it. If you're making like larger pulls, I mean, Seed of Corruption and Sow the Seeds, they're not target capped, right? So the larger the pulls, the better. I don't know the exact threshold where it becomes better numerically to, you know, play Sow the Seeds pull-wise over like spamming Rapture. But the larger pulls, for example, like Freehold and BFA, those double pulls, the larger packs, like the first pull in there. Sow the Seeds certainly pulled ahead of Vile Taint, in my opinion, towards the end, playing Writhe and Agony. You also get more value with this build, I feel, on 4 to 5 weeks than you do Tyrannical weeks. Regardless, though, going back to the generic build, I'd run Drain, Absolute, and Vile Taint. Like I said before, Vile Taint gives you the option, or whenever you cast Vile Taint, it applies a dot to every single mob that's hit. A dot on 3-4 mobs means 3 to 4 mobs taking more damage from your Rapture. Now, Singularity will apply a dot to one mob, will pulse on the others, but you don't get the actual damage increase from Rapture on all of them. Plus, Vile Taint is a 20-second cooldown, even though it costs a shard. Comparatively to PS, I think it is the de facto generic play for plus. I play Coil here, not much to say. I mean, Dark Fury does gain some value, and plus, it does extend the actual radius of Shadow Fury. You can see it here. It's a bit noticeable. It's bigger, it's larger than it seems, but for the most part, like, just Coil, I think, is the play, once again. A short CD, good heal, just solid. 45 row Dark Caller, Haunt, Grimoire Sacrifice. I've gotten 10,000 questions about Grimoire Sacrifice. Why aren't you playing it in plus? Why don't you play it in plus? Because it's bad. We've played it in plus before. The damage is bad. I think people often get, even after the buff, I think people often get lost in, they pull up a damage meter, for example, and they see like, oh yeah, it's dealing like 7.8% of my damage. It's really good. But you don't have a pet out. It makes you sacrifice your pet. So your pet deals, I guess, anywhere from like 5 to 6.5% in a key on average. That can vary a bit. Yes, Grimoire of Sacrifice will deal more damage, but you're also not playing a talent here that you would have with your pet out. So it just is not worth it in the long run. You're losing out on playing Haunt or Dark Caller. And if you're playing your Fell Hunter in plus, which you probably are, for the most part, you have Spell Lock. If you play Grimoire of Sacrifice and sacrifice your pet, you will get the main ability, but you won't get the actual Devour Magic part of your Fell Hunter, which is actually pretty relevant in Mythic Plus. So I don't think Grimoire of Sacrifice is a good choice. I've played with it. I don't like it. I don't think anybody really does that knows what they're doing in a competitive setting. Sorry. But Dark Caller, Haunt are the two choices you have here for the most part. I think early on, Dark Soul Misery is certainly where you want to be. Spoilers ahead in Mythic Plus due to the haste it gives you. Being able to pop it early going into a pack, get your dot set up and Rapture the pack down adds a lot of value. It syncs very well with Dark Caller. The big thing is that Dark Caller means you're not playing Haunt. Now, Haunt is more of a single target based ability, but it does give you a bit of extra like priority funnel damage in Mythic Plus. And that is sort of suiting to what Affliction's toolkit is. With UA being limited to 1, and also if you're playing Haunt, it sort of allows you to harvest like surrounding resources from mobs that aren't your main one. Put your Haunt, put your UA on your main one, and burn it down. With that being said, though, I do think there are some builds that will play this. Maybe looking at more of a single target build and plus, depending on certain keys that are more mini boss based or tyrannical based. Maybe Tyrannical Weeks favor Haunt over Dark Caller more. But for the most part, the build I want to run is playing Dark Caller and then Dark Soul Misery in the final row here. You can mess with Soul Conduit. Creeping Death is not terrible, I suppose, in certain settings, but I just think Dark Soul Misery is indeed the play here. So Drain Soul, AC, Vile Taint, Dark Caller, and Dark Soul Misery for Mythic Plus talents on an Affliction Warlock. So when you're looking at Affliction Legendaries in Shadowlands, thankfully there are a few that are pretty strong just across the board, and then some that are pretty strong in specific settings, which it's a good thing. So getting into these, the first one here is Perpetual Agony of Azakir. Agony has a 20% chance, or I guess a 20% increased chance to generate a soul shard. Now, by the way, you might be wondering here, where do these come from? Well, there was a location in game it showed you where every legendary came from. It has been removed, but I made a spreadsheet that shows you where they all are because for some reason it never was added back into the game. If you want a link to it, there's a link in the video description. Basically, Torghast is where it comes from. Torghast. Malefic Wrath is from Sire to Nathria, and Affliction Wrath Consumption is from Venthyr and Spires of Ascension. But getting back to this, so this legendary is solid across the board. Agony is your main dot, the only spell that really builds soul shards outside of like UA mobs dying or drain soul shard sniping. It's just a solid choice. It's good in plus, it's good in raiding, it's good in single target fights, AoE fights. It's just solid all around. Now this pattern you can technically make week 1. Something like Malefic Wrath, you have to wait until you actually kill Sire to Nathria in Castle Nathria. Nathria does not open until week 3. So while we do believe that the patterns are currently a guaranteed drop rate, I don't think it's really been confirmed 100%. When we went in like 2 months ago as a guild, they weren't. But we haven't heard anything at this point, so the earliest you can craft Malefic Wrath is going to be week 3 if you kill Sire to Nathria the first week the raid opens. Regardless, Agony is a very solid legendary choice. One of the 2 that I am considering crafting first. Well, I guess one of the 3 that I'm considering crafting first for Affliction. Sacrilege's Dark Strike. It is the Corruption legendary slow ring. A 50% slow, down from 60, but still 50, and a 15% corruption damage increase. Now, corruption deals damage whenever you apply it now, and it's also a dot. This does not increase the application damage, but it does increase the dot damage. This, paired with absolute corruption, can make for a very, very strong slow in Mythic Plus, or certain fights where you want this slow, like AoE-wise. The slow does not work on bosses, but it'll work on trash, like Sun King Salvation. Not the fight being trash, just the trash on the fight. You know what I'm saying? Or most of Mythic Plus. It's a solid alternative. It's a bit more narrow, though, comparatively to something like Perpetual Agony, which gives you just value everywhere you go, and a pretty good amount of it. Wrath and Consumption. This is also the legendary, I guess, the Legion artifact weapon effect. Whenever a target dies with Agony or Corruption applied to them, you gain a stack of this, increasing all periodic damage dealt by 5% for 20 seconds. This does indeed affect Drain Soul. We've tested it. Drain Soul's periodic ticks, it is considered a dot. Now, it's a max of 25% at 5 stacks. The thing with this is that this version of Affliction, with Malefic Rapture being a thing, our dots don't really deal a tremendous amount of damage. They deal like 6.5, like 8-ish% single target wise. You have Agony, Siphon, Life, Corruption, but the thing is, this is not really a legendary you want to play single target. It's more of a Mythic Plus AoE one. Now, typically in Plus, you're playing Absolute Corruption or rather than Agony, so one of those 2 dots would be increased damage wise, but it's just, I don't feel as strong comparatively to what it was in Legion when you had, you know, just your dots dealing damage. Now we have Rapture dealing most of it. Rapture ends up being like 35% of our breakdown in Mythic Plus and even single target fights. So this effect is still strong. It's certainly something to keep in mind. It's much better in Plus or heavy AoE than it is like single target. It's basically dead. But it's important to keep that in mind. It is still the Legion effect, and it's still good. Malefic Wrath. Malefic Rapture increases the damage of her Drain Soul by 25%, stacking up to 3 times for 8 seconds. I will say, I wish the actual duration of this legendary was a bit longer. It's not the end of the world, but it makes it would be nicer if it was longer. Regardless, though, this is a very strong single target legendary. This also will change your rotation a bit, at least potentially change your rotation a bit, not holding, you know, your Raptures for Rapture windows with Singularity, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But I feel that it's going to be between Perpetual Agony and Malefic Wrath as your main, like, go-to legendary for Castle Nathria. Now, on fights like Sun King Salvation or, I guess, Stone Legion Generals, more AoE-based fights, you're probably going to want to play Agony because it's hard to, like, maintain the 3 stacks of this and get a full Drain Soul or I guess, multiple Drain Souls off while trying to react to multiple mechanics, keep dots rolling on 3 targets, but it's still very solid. Execute damage is strong, and keep in mind that Drain Soul's damage is increased by 100% when you're in Execute. So this is a very strong effect to have around. This does indeed work with this. So, oh, by the way, Sire to Nathria appears to be a pretty interesting, have a pretty interesting final phase on him, which is more or less going to be Execute based. So it's important to keep that in mind. Once again, this drops from Sire to Nathria himself, so you can't craft this until week 3 at the earliest. The generic ones, Claw of Endereth, this does not give you more ticks of drain life over a full channel. It just channels twice as fast and restores twice the amount of health. There's no like Soul Rot Night Fade value here, because if you're casting Soul Rot and then casting Drain Life, you're probably playing inevitable demise. You don't even press Drain Life right now if you don't have ID stacks, Affliction, and Night Fae, all that. It's not worth it. Wilfred's is the other, like, one of the two, like, decent generic legendaries for Warlocks. Unfortunately for Afflocks, though, a cooldown reduction on Summon Dark Lair is not really that big of a deal because Dark Lair doesn't do a whole lot of damage, like we talked about. It's okay. It's not terrible. It's much better for Destro than it is Aff. It's okay for Demo. But this is not really one that I'm looking to craft early on with Affliction in mind. Pillars of a Dark Portal. It's basically Gateway Pants from Legion. 2 uses. They added a clause to this. If a target is like in between your gateways and you hit it, they get knocked in the air. It's pretty funny. It's pretty cool. It might even be used in certain spots in PvP. It's pretty cool, but I don't think it'll really have many PvE implications. The final one here is Relic of Demonic Synergy. This was changed recently, or I guess there was a different legendary effect, but it was changed to this. So damage done by you or your primary demon has a chance to grant the other one 10% increased damage for 15 seconds. So if your pet procs this, you, the Warlock, get 10% increased damage for 15 seconds. If you proc it, your pet gets it. Now, this is 3 ppm. 3 for you and 3 for your pet, though. This has a pretty high uptime. I've seen it proc over and over and over, like back to back to back, and I've seen it proc, you know, basically when the buff is about to drop and maintain like a, I don't know, 80% uptime over the course of a minute. This is a pretty strong effect, and it doesn't require you to alter your gameplay in any way, shape, or form, really, like Malefic Wrath does. If it procs, awesome. If it doesn't proc, oh well. There's a bit of RNG to it, but it's still a substantial DPS increase, and from the initial early sims that I've seen, it's simming pretty decently, and it's basically there for Aff, Destro, and Demo. Just a solid damage increase across the board. You've got a few down here that are like overall generic stuff. The only one that I'm really like interested in is Sephu's. It's basically Sephu's Secret from BF or from Legion, with a secondary stat increase of 80 for 15 seconds. Now, I mean, obviously you have your Interrupt and Spell Lock. You're also playing Mortal Coil. Technically, you have Fear you can cast. You can also just cast Shadow Fury. Like, there's a decent bit of ways you can proc this. I'm more so looking at it in Mythic Plus, but I'm not really looking to craft this early on. But it's something that I have on the radar. And it also goes on 3 things, being your neck, shoulder, and chest, apparently. I didn't even know that. But this is the only real one that I have here for the most part. I have my eye on. As far as legendaries go for Aff, crafting-wise, though, I want to say my plan for them at this point is not crafting any until the last moment possible, meaning most likely Mythic Raid release. If we have to craft some for Sire and Nathria, if the fight is incredibly overtuned, okay, we'll do that. But with tuning going on over the first few weeks and Heroic Week tuning probably taking place, I don't want to craft the legendary, you know, week 1, week 2, or even week 3 if I can avoid it, and then have it nerfed that Monday or that Tuesday. It's just not worth it to me. Now, I also want to say that I'm going to be most likely crafting multiple rank 1 legendaries, because whether you make a rank 1 or rank 4, the actual effect is the same thing. It's just a lower eye level. When I'm making legendaries for Affliction, I'm looking at Perpetual Agony of Azakir, Malefic Wrath as my main 2. I don't know at this point what I'm going to craft first, but these are the 2 big ones. Chances are decent. You know, if I was going to play Aff all tier, and a good bit in plus, I'd just craft Perpetual Agony of Azakir first. Even if I was going to do that mostly with a bit more like rating mixed in versus plus, it's still solid. Wrath is good single target, but not as good in dungeons because, hey, there's multiple mobs. I feel personally, while Wrath might be better in rating single target fights, there are a handful where it's going to be hard to get like drain value. My rankings as of right now, without sims being done, in my head, looking at the raid, looking at Mythic Plus, number 1, I would probably look at crafting Perpetual Agony first into Malefic Wrath. However, probably going to be crafting a couple legendaries for Destro and Demo too, but probably going Agony into Malefic Wrath because they're both good. I think you're going to get a bit more value out of Agony in the raid, and it's just good in Mythic Plus as a whole as well. So when you're looking at actual conduits for Affliction, there are a handful of there are some really good ones and some mediocre ones. Endurance conduits, drain life healing for more. Okay, it's fine. I'm not crazy big in this conduit, but I guess it's better than nothing. Or for whatever reason you don't want to run Diabolic Bloodstone, it's there, I suppose. It's probably better in PvP with like ID and like drain life legendary maybe for a bit more survivability, but I'm not super high on this as far as PvE goes. Diabolic Bloodstone, however, this conduit is very strong. Anyone that consumes your health stone infuses you with 10% leech for 6 seconds. So this is sort of like a throwback to the Legion Sweet Souls ability, that whenever somebody consumes your Hellstone, you would heal. This is very similar. There is, in a raid, you have 20 people that are probably popping Hellstones over the course of a pull, as long as they're, for the most part, in a higher end setting. You should pretty much be looking to use your Hellstone at some point during the fight, unless you really truly don't need to. So this leech is going to be relevant. Now, this does say your Healthstone, so they have to use your Healthstone. If there's multiple locks in the raid, well, make sure you drop a soul well every pull, and remind people to take Healthstones, because yeah. But this is a really strong effect. It certainly should not be overlooked. This is hands down my #1 endurance conduit out there. Resolute Barrier does give you a bit more. It's not bad. Attacks received that deal at least 5% of your health, decrease ending resolves cooldown by 10 seconds, can't occur more than once every 30 seconds. It's not bad. At higher ranks, it'd probably be more impactful. It's okay right now, but Diabolic Bloodstone takes the endurance conduits. Finesse conduits, you have reduced cooldown of Feldom, pet play all the time, solid conduit. This is the Eye of Kilrog conduit now that makes it no longer stealth, but you can place your demonic circle. It's okay. I don't think for the most part it's going to make much of a difference. You might see a few niche fights where you can place your circle early, but for the most part, if you can place your circle with Eye of Kilrog, you can probably just place it on your own, because both are probably going to pull the boss. But yeah, demonic momentum. Demonic Circle Teleport increases movement speed by X% for 5 seconds. This is a very strong conduit. Increased movement speed is very, very strong on fights, and 5 seconds is a long duration. The speed increases with the higher rank you go, and typically when you're popping your Demonic Circle, it's because you're trying to get away from an ability or move to a part of the room that's safe. This is a solid conduit, and as far as like progression goes, barring your pet dying over and over on a fight where it's just not tuned properly, this is my #1 choice here for PvE. Demonic Momentum, solid idea, solid choice all around. Shade of Terror, I don't know what to tell you. Sure, Fear can withstand more damage. I take Demonic Momentum, or I guess technically Fell if you really care. But I think Demonic Momentum is the play here. Getting to the actual potency conduits, though, what we're all here for. So we'll talk about the Covenant-based ones in a sec. I want to talk about the 4 just main AF ones. Focus Malignancy, Cold Embrace, Rolling Agony, and Corrupting Leer. Focus Malignancy says Malefic Rapture deals X increased damage to targets suffering from unstable affliction. So this gives more of like a priority target emphasis focus to affliction, because remember, unstable affliction is limited to 1 target now. It doesn't cost a soul shard, it has a long duration. This gives affliction more of that single target like priority feel. This is a very strong conduit. They're certainly going to play this single target with, spoilers ahead, Cold Embrace. Cold Embrace. The effectiveness of Shadow's Embrace is increased by 45%. So Shadow's Embrace already deals, I guess it gives you 9% increased damage. Basically, you're looking at what, like, I mean, 16-ish here, depending like what it converts to. You're looking at a pretty big damage increase when you have Shadow's Embrace stacked. This is really, really, I guess technically it'd be like 13, Florida math, but I mean, something like that. Regardless, I was thinking about higher ranks, but hey, look, it is Florida math. This is a really strong conduit single target, and it's not even bad in 2 targets if you can maintain Shadow's Embrace on both of them, depending on GCDs, what your talent build's like, if you have free time. Cold Embrace is a very, very, very strong choice for Affliction Warlocks. Rolling Agony. The duration of Agony is increased by 5.6 seconds. This is exceptionally strong in council-based fights like Dance Boss, like Council of Blood in Castle Nathria. This is very strong in Mythic Plus. It might not seem like it, but you also have to factor in pandemic time here, because it adds more duration onto your agony, so you have more time to refresh and extend with pandemic. This gives you so much more time, and plus to fill with Drain Soul, cast more Raptures, do whatever you need to do before you refresh your agonies. And at a high rank, you're looking at a crazy time increase here. I think it's like 9 seconds. I don't know. Let's consult the spreadsheet. It's like Rolling Agony, 9.6 seconds. Like, that's actually insane. It's such a long time. Like, so hands down, Council Fight, Mythic Plus, Rolling Agony, I feel is the play. Now, Corrupting Leer is a bit interesting. Agony and UA have a chance to reduce the cooldown of someone in Dark Lair by 5 seconds. If you're looking at like sustained 3, 4, 5 target scenarios, this probably is a pretty strong just conduit, just because of the fact that you can decrease your Dark Lair cooldown by so much. In the end, like, I played it in Plus, it's okay, but the thing is, Dark Lair doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. Yeah, it'll extend dots and, you know, cast Eye Beam, but chances are pretty low you're going to be in a 5-target sustain scenario for a really long time. So, single target wise, Focus Malignancy, Cold Embrace is what I'm going to look at for Affliction Warlocks. If you're looking at AoE or Mythic Plus, Rolling Agony. Now, if you can maintain Cold Embrace on 2 targets or 3 targets, go for it. Maintain Shadow's Embrace is what I mean. But I think at a certain point, it's going to become too much of a hassle to maintain Shadow's Embrace. While it might sim a bit higher, Rolling and Cold Embrace, I think the play here in Mythic Plus and like heavy AoE is probably going to be Rolling and Focus Malignancy. It still gives you that priority damage, which you're after a decent bit in Plus anyways. And it doesn't require you to like change your rotation or try and maintain Shadow's Embrace on 3 targets. Mythic Plus, Rolling Agony, Focus Malignancy, I feel are the plays. Cold Embrace, Focus Malignancy, single target for Conduits, for Afflocks. Getting into the Covenant ones, though, there are 4 Covenant-specific potency Conduits. Soul Tithe gives you a 10% damage increase to your Malefic Rapture if a target dies while affected by Scouring Tithe. If you can make good use of this, it's a solid option. I think it's probably going to be used more in Mythic Plus. There could be a handful of fights this tier, like, I guess, Stone Legion Generals, for example, Sun King Salvation, where you can get some pretty decent value out of Soul Tithe. For the most part, it's solid if you can get it to work. Otherwise, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think there's better choices just out of the 4 Affliction potency Conduits. The Catastrophic Origins, damage over time and inflicted curse lasts 50% longer. It's not worth, in my opinion. We tested Venthyr Mythic Plus recently, even as AF. Very disappointed in the damage of IC. They nerfed it way too much. At this current point in time, I'm not very high on this Conduit at all. Fatal Decimation is not good. They destroyed everything Necrolord had going on, and this Conduit was the final victim. It used to give you a chance to not consume a stack of Decimating Bolts 3 charges. Now it just increases the missile damage of Decimating Bolt. It's terrible. Don't play it. Soul Eater. Soul Rot damage and radius increased by 25%. Soul Rot, actually, this is a Night Fae ability. Pound for pound deals the most damage single target of any Covenant ability that we have. However, it's only an 8-second dot compared to Scouring Tithe for Kyrian being a permanent dot, essentially, because if the target doesn't die with Scouring Tithe active, the cooldown is reset. You cast it again. This is also a minute cooldown, which means that it makes your 45-second Rapture windows with Singularity very awkward, meaning they now become 1-minute windows. It's a really awkward ability. However, this Conduit, if you're playing Night Fae, is pretty strong. So depending on what you're doing, if you do end up going Night Fae, I would keep this in mind. I'd say out of these 4, Soul Tithe probably has the most potential, but consistency-wise, Soul Eater is probably where you want to be if you had a choice of any 4. Solid Conduit. Not a bad Conduit. Don't even bother reading these. They're not worth it. Starting off our Covenant and Soulbind talk here, I figure we start with Necrolord. Necrolord was hands down the best Covenant for Affliction Warlock early on. Unfortunately, over the course of about a month or so, every week Blizzard nerfed it more and more and more and more. Now it is complete and utter garbage. No one wants to play it as Affliction. It's very sad. It was my favorite Covenant, but hey, what can you do? I'd rather be on the fight and play a Covenant that I hate than ride the bench and enjoy my Necrolord Covenant. Regardless, the ability that you get is called Decimating Bolt. It hurls magic or bolts of decimating magic at your target, dealing shadow damage. But the big thing here is that it increases the damage of your next Drain Soul by 100% baseline. Now, this is increased Decimating Bolt's damage, and the bonus to Drain Life or Drain Soul is increased as your target's health decreases. Now, it's up to a maximum of 160% if your target is essentially at 1% health, basically dead. So this does increase Drain. It is sort of like an execute-based ability. And the cool thing is that Drain Soul is also an execute-based ability. So the damage does stack there. It also stacks with Malefic Wrath Gloves, if I have them somewhere. There we go. So there's a lot of effects that stack Drain Soul's value. This Legendary, Drain Soul itself, Decimating Bolt. But in the end, it's been changed a lot from its initial state. Initially, it was a 200 to 400% damage increase, deep in execute. Now it's 100 to 160. It only gives you 1 charge as well of Decimating Bolt. Unlike Destro and Demo, who get 3 charges. You'll see only 1 here. Because at 3 stacks of Drain Soul with Decimating Bolt, or 3 stacks of this, it was deemed incredibly OP. It also led to a really awkward playstyle, but unfortunately, TLDR, Necrolord was nerfed tremendously for Affliction Warlocks. As cool as it is, as awesome as it is, ripping off these huge Drain Souls and Execute, it was nerfed too much. It's just not a good choice, in my opinion. Regardless, though, if you're looking at Soulbinds for Affliction and want to go Necrolord, Ameni and Bonesmith, in my opinion, are the better choices here. Ameni gets Lead by Example as the very first one here. Decimating Bolt increases your int by 5% and up to 4 nearby. This is a 4, not a 2. 4 nearby allies' primary stat by 2 for 7.5 seconds. You gain 2% additional intellect for each ally affected. So, Decimating Bolt is a 45-second cooldown. You're going to have this effect basically. It has a pretty decent uptime. This was recently nerfed. However, it's still not a horrendous ability. It's cool seeing an ability like this early on, similar to what Pelagos has for Kyrian, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But in the end, most of these like large, really strong Soulbind abilities are being gutted over the course of this week. So hopefully this is the final nerf we see to this. But regardless, Lead by Example is solid. To a similar extent, you have like Gnashing Chompers giving you a haste increase at defeating an enemy, which could be relevant on a handful of fights. Many is a solid choice for Necrolord. To a similar extent, you have Bonesmith. These two abilities were swapped. Forgeborn Reveries, and I guess they were sort of moved around. This was here. I believe this was like here. But regardless, your int and armor are increased by 1% for each enchantment or enhancement on your armor, up to 3. Whenever you die, you essentially fight for 10 more seconds, but your damage and healing is reduced by 50%. So it's sort of a cool like, after death kind of effect. The unfortunate part here is that, like, unlike many, you're not getting any value out of this passively. You're not proccing this unless you're dead. And if you're dead, you're not really in a good spot. I guess there is the passive intellect increase, but it's not really where I want to be. And it's not like, at least like for this ability, and it's not like dying increases your damage by 50%, so you can cheese certain things. It reduces it. So there's that. The final ability here has been reworked a little bit. It's Marrowed Gemstone. After landing 10 critical strikes, you gain 18% increased chance to crit for 10 seconds, which is actually pretty solid. It may only occur once per 60 seconds, but I mean, this is actually a pretty solid effect. It used to be here, and it had a bit of a different proc rate on it. It's still super strong. So as far as Necrolord goes, even though the Covenant is not the best, there are a couple of Soulbinds that are decent options here. 1 through 4, unfortunately, ranking-wise, I think Necrolord is probably a 3 or 4 for Affliction Warlock. It's just not very good. I will say, though, comparing all the abilities here, which we'll get to in a minute, I think Necrolord has the most potential, if it's buffed, to be the best or second best Covenant out there. Venthyr, which we're going to talk about next, and even Night Fae are sort of set it and forget it kind of abilities, but there's a Decimating Bolt Affliction has a lot going on for it. Even like a minor buff to Decimating Bolt could mean a lot for Affliction, so keep that in mind. Venthyr Warlocks, Venthyr Affliction Warlocks, I guess it's a universal ability, but regardless, if you're playing Affliction as Venthyr, you gain the Impending Catastrophe ability, which is on a 1-minute cooldown, and it is essentially a cloud of chaotic anima that deals a certain amount of damage when it hits the target, and then applies a dot to every target around it that's hit by the explosion, and also applies a curse to them. Now, the cool thing with this ability, number one, is that it is indeed smart cursing now. Smart cursing meaning it's putting weakness on melee mobs, I guess this turnip is considered melee, and tongues on casters, mobs that have mana and cast spells. That's a huge quality of life increase. It wasn't doing that early on. The unfortunate thing, though, is that this ability was nerfed tremendously. They nerfed the impact damage by 80%, and then nerfed the actual dot by, I believe, 50%. So we ran a key actually sort of, I think yesterday, and I can show you the overall damage from that run. This was Impending Catastrophe's damage. It dealt like 4.1% plus 0.3. This is the impact damage. Now, I will say this does not factor in the Impending Catastrophe is a dot, and it counts towards Rapture. The other cool thing, similar to like Kyrian Scouring Tithe, which we'll get to in a minute here, it is also, well, I can just show you. It is also extended by our Dark Glare. Now, the cool thing is you can get more Rapture value. And in AoE, this is really the only like Covenant ability. I guess you have Night Fae, but it's target capped in a sense. This is not capped. You can cast this AoE onto a huge pack, extend on everything, and get a lot of extra Rapture value. The curses are relevant. Even the damage is something. But when it comes to single target, this ability is lacking. It is just not very strong. And even at AoE, when it comes to Mythic Plus, yeah, applying all the curses is relevant. It's a bit of utility, but it's not as impactful as like a Shroud or some other form of utility. It's there, it's cool, but the damage is not incredibly impressive. It's sort of mediocre. And when it comes to single target, yeah, once again, it is a dot, but it's a 1-minute dot, which means that you're holding your singularity for 15 seconds, and it just makes things really awkward with Rapture windows. I think Venthyr is a lot better in Mythic Plus with IC comparatively to rating single target. In the end, It's not a terrible ability, it's just undertuned, and I don't think it's as strong as others, for example. Now, there are a couple Soulbinds here that are okay-ish. I don't think any of the Venthyr Soulbinds are incredibly impressive. Probably the most impressive is Nathria with Thrillseeker. This is basically a 20% haste proc for 10 seconds. When this procs, you will certainly notice it. 20% haste it's a lot, and this is probably the big thing drawing you to this actual Soulbind. There are a couple down here that increase like 3% more damage and less damage taken, but for the most part, there's not really any ability that sticks out like similar to what the old Pelagos ability does, or like Bonesmith for Necrolord, for example. Looking at Draven, there are a couple that are okay, but for the most part, like, you're looking at like a stacking 1% intellect buff, like a 4% int buff when you're above 80%. If you fall below half, it's lost. You can't really control that actual increase, and that 4% int is nice. It's not bad. It's a permanent buff, but I guess when you're above 80% health, but you can't really control that. And even if, like, I just feel other Soulbinds are more impactful compared to basically everything else everything that Venthyr offers. While I like the ability, while I think it's pretty cool, I don't think it's incredibly impactful for Afflocks. I wouldn't fault you for playing it, but I think it's much more suited for AoE Mythic Plus than it is for raiding. So Night Fae for Affliction Warlocks is a bit interesting. The ability you gain is Soul Rot that withers away all life force of your current target and up to 3 additional targets nearby. So essentially, if I hit this target here with Soul Rot, it would also apply the dot to these other 3 surrounding targets. The important thing to keep in mind here is that your primary target suffers twice the amount of damage. It says it right here. The primary target takes 4,600 damage, essentially. And the secondary ones take 2,300 over 8 seconds. So this is 4 seconds shorter than the impending catastrophe dot that Venthyr puts out. And I mean, it's much shorter than the Kyrian one, which we'll get to in a minute, because Kyrian is essentially permanent, although not being AoE. So the cool thing about this is that whenever you cast the ability, for the next 8 seconds after casting it, if you cast Drain Life, well, it'll hit every target affected by Soul Tithe, Soul Tithe. Also, it's extendable by your Dark Glare. And Soul Tithe meaning Soul Rot. Sorry, it's 3 in the morning. But Soul Rot. Now, the unfortunate thing here is that for the most part, this is really cool having an AoE Drain Life, but Drain Life is so undertuned that even if you put the ability up, you don't press Drain Life. The only time you press Drain Life as an Affliction Warlock when you're playing Soul Rot is when you have the Inevitable Demise talent selected over the Drain Soul talent in the 15 row. And the other unfortunate thing is that, yeah, the actual Soul Rot might last 8 seconds, but a full Drain Life channel lasts, what, 4.5? Once that full, like, AoE Drain Life channel at max stack of ID finishes, you're not pressing Drain Life for the rest of Soul Rot's duration. So, at this current point in time, what you really want it for, if you're not playing ID, I mean, is the dot, whether it's single target or AoE. Now, as I mentioned before, the actual conduit for Night Fae is a 25% damage increase to Soul Rot. Like I said, Soul Rot pound for pound is the hardest hitting Covenant ability that we have as far as locks go. But the big thing that separates this Covenant or this ability from like Kyrian, which we'll get to in a minute here, is that it only lasts 8 seconds. And once again, similar to Venthyr, it's a minute cooldown, which means if you're playing Singularity with Soul Rot, you're holding your Singularity for 15 seconds to put your Soul Rot up. They're just synced here because I pressed it early. So it puts you in an awkward spot. It's not a permanent dot like Scouring Tithe, so you don't get as much Rapture value, but the raw damage amp actually is there. Now, I think this ability, pound for pound, is very good. Night Fae is probably pretty close to the best Covenant, which, you know, we'll have a summary of all the Covenants at the end here, but it's very, very close. Looking at the Soulbinds, however, well, they're also pretty good. So Dreamweaver is interesting because this is the only potency, or the only Soulbind that has 2 potency conduits very early on. At this current point in time, you get this second potency conduit at Renown 14. Every other Soulbind out there, some were like this before, but they were changed. This one was not. Every other Soulbind out there is like level 20, 21 or so, give or take. You get this like 2 weeks before any other Soulbind. That's Kyrian, Venthyr, Night Fae, and Necrolord. This is the one Soulbind that you get 2 potencies early on. Now, the crazy thing with Dreamweaver is that it doesn't stop at getting 2 potencies at Renown 14. The final ability here is Field of Blossoms. It says Soul Rot puts flowers at your feet for 10 seconds that increase your haste by 12% when you stand in them. A 12% haste CD on a 1-minute cooldown is actually pretty strong. Haste does a lot for Affliction, and just in general, it's a pretty strong effect. I'm certainly impressed by what Dreamweaver as a Soulbind brings to the table, but even looking at the other ones here, looking at Kyrian, I don't even know. The very first ability being Wild Hunt Tactics, your damage to targets above 75% health and healing to targets below 35 is increased by 10%. So comparatively to another Warlock who's playing another Covenant or a Soulbind, you're just going to be doing probably 10% more damage than them for a quarter of the fight. It's a pretty strong ability. Now, it's not as strong as having it, say, in Execute, but having this as your very first option with this Soulbind is really strong. But keep in mind, you unlock different Soulbinds and different traits and final abilities at later renown, later into the storyline, all that. Oh, by the way, in that first quarter of the fight, you get a 15% increased movement speed buff. It's pretty insane. So Nightfae certainly has a lot of strong Soulbinds, a lot of strong options when it comes to a Covenant. Let's talk a little bit about Kyrians, though. So as an Affliction Warlock, the ability that you get for Kyrians is Scouring Tithe. Scouring Tithe deals a bit of damage instantly and then even more damage over 18 seconds. Now, the cool thing with Scouring Tithe is that if you put it on a target, first of all, there's no travel time. If the target does not die, basically if it lives under the effect of Scouring Tithe, the cooldown is reset. In about 10 seconds here, you'll see it refresh on my bars right here. If the target does die while Scouring Tithe is active on it, you get 5 soul shards back. So it's pretty interesting. In Mythic Plus, you can either use this at the start of a pack, like on a priority mob, or save it towards the end in a sense if you want some shards back going into the next pack. The other cool thing is that this dot, duration-wise, is indeed extended by your Dark Lair. 15, 23. It is extended by your Dark Lair, and we can Rapture here. It also counts as a dot towards Malefic Rapture. So you're maintaining your Agony, your Siphon, your Corruption, UA, and when you go into your Rapture windows, you'll have Scouring Tithe active with Phantom Singularity, thus giving you more overall Rapture damage as far as an Affliction Warlock goes. Like I said, if the target dies, okay, it goes on cooldown. But if it doesn't, it's a permanent dot. And single target-wise, that's pretty strong. Looking at Kyrian Soulbinds here, hands down, everybody pretty much knows at this current point in time, November 19th at 2:30 in the morning, Pelagos is the Soulbind that you want to play. The first ability you get here gives you Mastery Orbs to spawn on the ground whenever you have Scouring Tithe active. Basically, walking into them increases your mastery, and it is further increased by the more you absorb. Mastery is very important for Affliction Warlocks because it increases your Rapture damage as well as damage to other abilities. It's very strong. This ability was initially here, and they moved it. Now, to a similar extent, Let Go of the Past was nerfed today. It used to be a versatility increase for 6 seconds, and it stacked with 4%. Now it's some weird magic damage reduction taking thing. It doesn't matter. The thing is, Kyrian is still very good for Warlocks. This ability is still very strong. And even though Nightfae gets access at this current point in time to double potency conduits a bit earlier than Kyrian, it's not really going to matter a whole lot. This ability is strong, and Kyrian is just still the best Covenant all around for Affliction Warlocks. Scouring Tithe is strong for what it does for the actual spec, and Pelagos, with combat meditation, and just the way that Affliction works right now currently is still, in my opinion, the best choice, the best Covenant, the best Soulbind for Affliction Warlocks. So, after all the Covenants being talked about here, if you ask me to rank them from 1 to 4, best to worst, looking at doing a mix of Castle Nathria and Mythic Plus, not really taking PvP into account here much, I don't really do it a whole often, looking at it from a more PvE perspective, I would say number 1 is Kyrian. Scouring Tithe is just a strong effect all around for Affliction. 5 shards back if a target dies, 5 raptures, or just a permanent dot, single target for extra rapture damage. It does lose a little bit of value in like AoE Mythic Plus. I guess it's not as valuable comparatively to some AoE abilities. But once again, if you're using it for shard gen at a certain point in a pack dying or something like that, it's a pretty substantial upside to that as well. To the same extent, Pelagos, his mastery effect being the very first thing you pick up, is really strong with Rapture scaling, just mastery scaling for AF in general. You can see how strong AF is with this toolkit on live, even without borrowed power. Mastery affecting Rapture is really big. Number 2, I would say Nightfae. The Nightfae dot is strong in single targets when it comes to Mythic Plus. Now, whether you're playing ID, Drain Life every once in a while or not, it's a strong effect. And single target wise, whether you're playing the Conduit or not to increase the damage, Soul Rot's damage, pound for pound, is up there. It deals more damage than Scouring Tithe. The thing is, Scouring Tithe is a permanent dot that in the long run increases Rapture's damage more comparatively because it's active for 95% of that one target's lifespan. Number 3 Oh, the actual Soulbind abilities for Night Fae are strong too, being, you know, the second potency rank at Renown 14 and just the incredible abilities to come with it. Looking at rank 3, I would say probably as a whole, Venthyr and Necrolord are close. I think Venthyr is a decent bit better than Necrolord and Mythic Plus for Affliction. It is an AoE dot, rapture damage, all of that being very strong. However, single target wise, the dot is not impressive in the slightest. It's on a 1 minute cooldown and just makes singularity timing really, really awkward. That coupled with the fact that Venthyr doesn't really have like any crazy impressive Soulbinds puts it in an awkward spot for me. I give it the nod over Necrolord at the third best covenant, most likely due to its extra value in Mythic Plus. Number 4, big Necrolord. Probably a bit better single target than Venthyr, but just having 1 damage amp to Drain Soul in Mythic Plus, the fact that half the time you're canceling the Drain Soul cast or shard sniping a mob, not getting full value out of it, it's just awkward. Unfortunately, Necrolord is my favorite covenant, the one I was hoping to play, but I'm probably going to end up playing Kyrian, the one I was hoping to play almost the least outside of Night Fae, because, hey, I don't want to ride the bench. I want to be in on relevant fights. So, rotationally, if you're looking at a single target opener for Affliction, we're playing Kyrian here. Like we just mentioned, Kyrian's very good with Scouring Tithe. If you're playing Night Fae with Soul Rot or Venthyr with IC, for the most part, from what I've seen through testing and things, you'll want to hold your Singularity and your Rapture windows for your Impending Catastrophe or your Soul Rot. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. If you want to track my actual spells I've cast, they're right here in the action tracker. So, for the most part, on a single target boss, you're starting at range, right? So what I'm going to do, you're going to precast your Haunt, Unstable Affliction, basically hit at the same time: Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, Scouring Tithe, Singularity, Dark Soul, Berserking, Dark Lair, drain to 3 stacks of Shadows, Embrace, Rapture. Rapture. Watch your Haunt tracker here. Refresh Haunt and keep rapturing. Basically, you want to get all your Raptures out within this window because all your dots are active. Hey, there's Pelagos Orb, so it goes up. Refresh dots in Pandemic, bang, bang, bang. You can get your UA up one more time, and you're good to go. And then basically you have about 25 seconds until your Singularity comes back around. Scouring Tide is going to drop in a second or two here. There it is. You refresh that on cooldown, and you're pretty much just maintaining dots for the most part. This glow effect is when my dots fall in the Pandemic range, so we can refresh those and we're good to go. So we have about 8 seconds here in Singularity. I'm going to refresh UA now, hit Corruption, go into my Haunt refresh Siphon a tiny bit earlier, go into Singularity, and start rapturing a bit. You're going to see Scouring drop right here. It's fine. It is what it is. Start rapturing. The big thing here is all our dots are rolling. We have Shadows Embrace at 3 stacks. Dump all our raptures, all our shards, catch dots before they fall, and bam, there you go. You're out of that window. Besides that, you maintain your Unstable Afflictions, your Haunts, your dots, and pretty much just go from there. As mentioned, damage breakdown wise, your dots aren't really hitting as hard as you probably would like them to be. Agony, Corruption, Siphon, about 6% to 7.8. The big thing is, though, the way I sort of look at it is that, yeah, they're not as impactful as they were before previously. Dot tuning, dot damage tuning and scaling is always a tough subject to deal with. But they're adding more to your Malefic Rapture damage. Now, we're not playing the optimal Conduits here rotationally for this, just showing you the actual opener. But for the most part, Rapture is going to make up the majority of her damage, followed by UA typically. Then, depending on what covenant you're playing, it could be Drain Soul, it could be Agony, maybe even Soul Rot. But for the most part, that's it. It's pretty much open up like that, maintain your dots, and you're pretty much good to go. Your Rapture cast revolve around Phantom Singularity windows, and that's it. I will say, if you're going to shard cap, say for example you're at 5 shards for whatever reason and you have like 10 seconds on your Singularity, cast a Rapture. You don't want to sit at 5 shards and lose value there. But for the most part, if you're not shard capping or over capping, there's not really a reason to Rapture outside of your Singularity window if there's not a priority mob you're trying to burn down or something along those lines. Now, when it comes to Affliction's AoE cooldowns, or I guess AoE rotation, which you'll see more so in Mythic Plus, we're going to pick the normal build that I suggested playing in Mythic Plus, being Dark Soul, Dark Caller, Vile Taint, Absolute Corruption, and Drain Soul. Now, I am playing a Night Fae Warlock here. I'm not going to hit my Night Fae ability because it depends on what covenant you choose. I'm just on it because, hey, I was making the Night Fae portion of the video. Regardless, if you're playing Night Fae or Venthyr, you're certainly, or I guess technically Kyrian, you're going to want to extend the dot because Dark Lair, like I said, does indeed extend Soul Rot, Impending Catastrophe, and Scouring Tithe. Regardless of that, my typical opener when it comes to Mythic Plus, if the tank is like running into the pack we're going to precast Seed of Corruption. So precast Seed, right into Dark Soul. All Zerking actually, then go UA on my target. Agony, 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 Agony. Seed pops. Go Vile Taint, Dark Glare, and you can drain this 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace depending on what the pack is like, but then just start Rapturing. You've got plenty of time because your Vile Taint, your UA, whatever's all been extended, and you have the effective Dark Soul still rolling. You can, if it's like 2 targets, try and juggle Shadow's Embrace here and here, get the tab back every once in a while to refresh, and for the most part, you should be okay. Dots are falling now, so we start refreshing Agonies, hit them all up before they end up falling, and then for the most part, it's just basically maintain your UA and your Vile Taint. It's back up again. We can go into another Rapture window here. Now, depending on how long the pack lives, I'm not necessarily going to want to cast Malefic Rapture, or I'm sorry, Vile Taint, right when the pack's about to die, if we're going into another trash pack, for example. But most of your damage is going to be dealt because you're Rapturing when Vile Taint is active in those Vile Taint windows in Mythic Plus. Now, the other important thing here, whether it's a Mythic Plus or rating alike, is shard sniping. Once again, Unstable Affliction gives you a shard if the target that's on dies. So let's say, for example, this mob's about to die, and I'm at, let's say I'll Rapture down to, I don't know, like 2 shards here. I'll try to at this point. Let's say we're at like 2 shards. This mob's about to die. I'll keep UA on it. When it dies and we're draining, we'll get up to 3 shards. We'll go from 1 to 3. And then it's important, depending on how long the other mobs have left, if you have time to move your UA around, maybe get a Rapture or 2 in, and then, you know, UA drain, then drain. It's important to try and min-max that value of getting the max Rapture stacks out, the max Rapture cast with your remaining shards, but also having, you know, 3-4 shards going into the next pack, so you're not like, all right, well, I can't precast my seed, I have to manually spread Agonies, and I'm doing no damage while the rest of the group is blasting everything down. Shard management in Mythic Plus, AoE fights in Castle Nathria and beyond is incredibly important. So proper Unstable Affliction play, Drain Soul play, all that is something you're going to want to master. But with time, it's really not that challenging. And that should pretty much be it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video gave you a better feeling or idea or grasp on how Affliction Warlock looks heading into Shadowlands the first few weeks, Castle Nathria, and Mythic Plus. Now, like I said, it's currently November 19th at 3:30 in the morning. As of right now, tuning is still going on, so I tried to push these videos back far enough where I thought we'd be past most of the tuning. However, they nerfed Pelagos today and a handful of other Soulbinds, so we'll see how relevant this video stays. If there are big changes, I will pin them in the comment section below, but for the most part, I think we've probably made it out pretty safe at this point. Let me know what you guys think of this version of AF, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get back to you. Once again, all my weak auras, profiles, or add-ons are indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, grab them, ask any questions, hang out anytime, feel free to do so. Also, over the next few days, I'm going to be releasing the Destruction Warlock and then eventually Demonology Warlock guides for Shadowlands as well. So if you want to see more of those or see more WoW content in general, feel free to smash the subscribe button below and be sure to hit that like button while you're down there as well. Thanks again, dudes. I know this was a long video, but there are just so many systems to cover in Shadowlands, especially for the first guide of the expansion. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks again, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon. Peace.